Whose fault? Trump, Zelensky, Vance. Nearly come to blows tensions between Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky, and J.D. Vance have been increasing over conflicting views on U.S. assistance for Ukraine. Trump's America First position, Vance's cynicism about foreign aid, and Zelensky's urgent requests for military and financial support have put these characters at odds, resulting to a heated conversation that nearly resulted in a fight. In this video, we will go through 7 key points behind this tension. Number 7. Provocative rhetoric from Trump. Trump's communication style is naturally confrontational, with blunt, inflammatory language intended to dominate discussions and establish his authority. In this hypothetical confrontation, Trump's rhetoric would probably be the main source of tension. Trump has a history of making unsupported allegations about Ukrainian corruption, especially during his impeachment in 2019 when he claimed without proof that the Biden family had committed wrongdoing in Ukraine. If he brought up these allegations during the meeting, calling Ukraine's urgent requests for military or financial assistance a waste of U.S. resources, it would immediately undermine Volodymyr Zelensky's appeals. Zelensky, who sees Ukraine's conflict as a moral and strategic need for the West, would become even more resentful of Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy, which is frequently expressed in terms of what's in it for us. Additionally, by using language like, "You're not doing enough for us," or "Why should we keep giving you money?" to depict Zelensky's opposition as betrayal or ingratitude, Trump may personalize the issue. In addition to downplaying Ukraine's grave problem, this kind of discourse would show disrespect for Zelensky's leadership, which would make the Ukrainian president angry and defensive. Trump's propensity to inflame disputes with insulting remarks and personal assaults would make productive discussion all but impossible, paving the way for a furious altercation. Number 6. Zelensky's defensive posture. As a wartime leader whose nation faces an ongoing threat of a full-scale Russian invasion, Volodymyr Zelensky must deal with a great deal of pressure and emotional strain. In this case, his reactions would be influenced by his urgent need to win over the West and justify Ukraine's sacrifices. Zelensky's response would probably be a combination of defiance and frustration if Trump or Vance disregarded Ukraine's requirements, for instance by turning down aid offers or recommending that Ukraine make territorial concessions to Russia. Having spent years organizing worldwide solidarity for Ukraine's struggle, he would view such words as a betrayal, particularly considering Trump's history of withholding help in 2019. Trump's transactional attitude would be a stark contrast to Zelensky's communication style, which is frequently direct and emotionally charged. For example, he might reply, "History will judge your inaction," or "We are dying for freedom while you count pennies." His intensity is essentially reactive, a defense of his country's sovereignty, rather than needless aggression, even though it has the potential to increase tensions. Zelensky's mandate as a wartime leader, not an instigator, would be reflected in his refusal to give in to demands that are seen as undermining Ukrainian sovereignty, such as territorial concessions. He would find it challenging to maintain diplomacy in the face of Trump, and Vance's apparent indifference or animosity given his emotional commitment to Ukraine's survival. Number 5. Vance's amplification of tensions. Trump's combative approach would probably be reinforced by J.D. Vance, a fervent Trump supporter and outspoken opponent of unfettered aid to Ukraine. Vance has openly stated that American resources ought to be directed towards internal problems, even going so far as to propose that Ukraine give up territory in order to resolve the conflict, a stance that Zelensky finds unacceptable. Vance may share Trump's cynicism in this confrontation by calling aid to Ukraine a bottomless pit, or charging Zelensky with lecturing the United States in spite of its generosity. By portraying Zelensky's pleas as entitled or unappreciative, his language has the potential to turn the discussion from one about policy to one about personal rivalry. Vance would justify his claims regarding Ukraine's strategic importance by ideologically supporting Trump's America First stance, which would infuriate Zelensky. For instance, Vance could say, "We have our own problems at home. We can't keep sending billions to Ukraine," or "Europe should be doing more. Why is this our burden?" His function as a political amplifier converting Trump's instincts into policy criticisms would further polarize the situation and make de-escalation more difficult. Vance's rejection of bipartisan agreement on backing Ukraine could also send a message to Zelensky that U.S. commitments are untrustworthy, which would escalate tensions. By focusing on U.S. domestic priorities and downplaying Ukraine's strategic significance, Vance would contribute to the confrontational atmosphere, making it more difficult for Zelensky to participate constructively. Number 4. Historical grievances resurfacing. This encounter would be tainted by the shadow of Trump's 2019 impeachment, which was sparked by his attempt to use military aid to pressure Zelensky into looking into Joe Biden. If Trump brought up unproven corruption claims or suggested that Ukraine owes him for previous aid, Zelensky's mistrust would flare, and the Ukrainian president, who has put up with Trump's previous quid pro quo, might accuse him of repeating history by politicizing aid, such as by saying, "You tried to blackmail us before. Now you abandon us," emphasizing the continuity between Trump's past and present actions. On the other hand, Trump could shift the blame for the current crisis onto Zelensky, arguing that Ukraine's failure to eradicate corruption justified his previous or current skepticism. Any remaining goodwill would be undermined by this cycle of recrimination, in which both leaders would use their old grievances as weapons. Trump's retorts, such as, "You got us into this mess we have to," would avoid responsibility, while Zelensky's allusion to the impeachment story would humanize the dispute. In keeping with Trump's narrative, Vance may dismiss the impeachment as a hoax, which would enrage Zelensky even more. Therefore, historical baggage would turn policy discussions into personal grudges, making it almost impossible to concentrate on the pressing problems at hand. Number 3. Contentious policy disagreements. Irreconcilable policy differences would be at the center of the conflict. Trump and Vance, who support an isolationist America First strategy, may argue that aiding Ukraine diverts attention from domestic priorities like manufacturing or border security, citing budgetary concerns $100 billion for Ukraine. Imagine that spent in Ohio, or suggesting that Europe should foot the bill. Zelensky, on the other hand, would frame aid as a strategic investment in global security and a moral imperative, warning that a Russian victory would embolden adversaries like China. Vance's calls for Ukraine to cede territory for peace would be particularly inflammatory, as Zelensky believes that territorial integrity cannot be compromised. Philosophical rifts between nationalism and collective security, as well as between idealism and realism, would be revealed by these policy differences. Although disputes are unavoidable, the clash would escalate if Trump and Vance refused to see Russia's danger to NATO or Ukraine's grave circumstances. For instance, Vance would contend that Ukraine's resistance is needlessly extending the war, while Trump might reject Zelensky's warnings about Russian aggression as alarmist. Both sides would be unwilling to give in as a result of these essentially diametrically opposed points of view. Number 2. Power dynamics and ego. Zelensky's unwavering fortitude and Trump's controlling demeanor would make for a volatile combination. Trump, who is used to being respected, may interpret Zelensky's resistance as a challenge to his power and insult him personally. "You're a puppet of the DC warmongers," or "maybe we'll cut all your aid." Zelensky, who used sheer willpower to mobilize support from around the world, would refuse to accept subordination and present Ukraine's struggle as a test of Western determination. Trump would become overly sensitive to criticism as a result of his retorts, which would cast doubt on his leadership. "We're dying for freedom while you count pennies." As a supporter of Trump, Vance would probably intensify this struggle for dominance by presenting Zelensky's resistance as evidence of globalist ingratitude. Zelensky's resistance to be patronized and Trump's demand for domination would cause the ego clash to dominate meaningful conversation, turning it into a battle of wills. For instance, Trump would constantly cut Zelensky off and reject his arguments as unimportant, but Zelensky would not back down and would intensify his speech to match Trump's. Vance would further polarize the conversation by supporting Trump, making it nearly hard to find common ground. Number 1. Failure to de-escalate. All parties are responsible for allowing tensions to escalate. Trump's refusal to change his tone or Vance's support for his strategies would indicate that he prefers conflict to compromise Zelensky, while justified in his urgency, could deepen the rift by characterizing U.S. hesitancy as cowardice. "History will judge your weakness." The leaders would be caught in a vicious cycle of provocation, if there were no impartial mediators or diplomatic procedures such as staffers stepping in to calm tensions. Trump and Vance, dismissing diplomacy as weakness, might view de-escalation as giving ground, and Zelensky's existential concerns would limit his flexibility. Though Trump and Vance are more accountable as the catalysts of animosity, the failure to value communication above conflict ultimately represents a breakdown in society. They turn a policy disagreement into a personal battleground by ignoring Ukraine's predicament and using it as a political football to further their own agenda. For instance, Vance might present the altercation as evidence of Zelensky's entitlement, while Trump might leave the meeting with the words, "We're done here." With little else to do, Zelensky might publicly denounce their lack of backing, deepening the rift even more. Thus, the failure to de-escalate would have long-term effects on how the world views American leadership as well as U.S. Ukraine ties. As a result of their inflammatory rhetoric and policy positions, fault is divided but tends to point to Trump and Vance as the instigators. If you liked our video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel.